Shavua Tov, Chodesh Tov. How's everybody? So we got up to the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Yud Dalet. And it's about 6 lines up before the end of Kuf Yud Dalet Amud Aleph. Now this Mishnah is a continuation of the Seder Leil HaPesach. In other words, we've already recited Kiddush, and we've already poured the second kos of Yain. What happens now? We're finished with Kiddush, and then the Mishnah says, Heviu lefanov. But it doesn't say what they brought in front of him, but you could figure it out because it says mitabel. Mitabel means to dip. And this is what's called Tibul Rishon after Kiddush with Yerakos. And we're going to take vegetables and we're going to do Tibul with vegetables. Now, Rashi and the Rashbam understand that they bring him Yerakos. However, Rabbeinu Chananel, which you'll see published on the side of Yadaf, on the left column, and the Rambam as well, and even Tosfos, they explain that after Kiddush, they bring the shulchan with the Suda on it. And what they'll see on the shulchan is something called chazeres. And we'll discuss exactly what chazeres is. It's a vegetable in any event, like horseradish. And so what was brought in front of them, according to these Rishonim, were not the Yerakos themselves, but rather the entire shulchan with the Suda on it. They had, what we call like portable tables, for eating the meals. But on the table, they put chazeres, and that's a tibul, that's a vegetable for tibul purposes. I mean, we're going to have to discuss what vegetable it is and what we put the vegetable in to dip it in. Now, it's interesting. We haven't yet eaten the meal yet. Usually vegetables are eaten during the course of the meal. They're integrated into the meal. Here, you haven't even started the meal yet. All you did was Kiddush. Imagine bringing out a vegetable and dipping it in charoses or whatever it is before the meal. That's what's called a shinui. Shin, yud, nun, vav, yud. Shinui means we want to arouse the curiosity of the children to ask, why is this night different than any other night? And that's called manishtana. And manishtana is an integral part of the Seder. So Vigadat al-Bincha means that we should talk to the children, but in a response to questions that the children raise. And that's called the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which the Rambam writes has to be derech she'ela u'tshuva, through question and answer. So we want to set up a situation in which the children's curiosity will be aroused and they will raise these questions. And in that way, we are facilitating the Ikar mitzvah, the main mitzvah this night, which is Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, to fulfill the pasuk V'yigadet lebincha. Now, we're assuming that even though you're only doing one tibul, so when is the manishtana gonna be raised? Right? In the manishtana it says Balayla zeh shtei pa'amim. We're gonna have another tibul, another time that we dip it later on, and the children are gonna ask, well, why are you dipping twice? So the question is, can we achieve this goal just based on one tibul, when the question itself is about 2 tibulim? But again, I think the answer is going to be the same answer, that since we're making a shinui, and it's not normal practice to do a tibul of a yerek, of a vegetable, before you start the meal, that's already going to arouse the curiosity of the children to raise the question of Manishtana. Now, Manishtana is going to come one blot later in the Mishnah, actually 2 blot later in the Mishnah Kuf Tazayin, but there that says Ba'alayla zeh shtei piyamim. Now, why didn't the children ask in the Manishtana, Madua Ba'alayla zeh tovlim yerek lifnei asuda? That should have been their question. Why are we dipping before the meal? And in all likelihood, that is going to be the question of the child. He's going to ask another question later on when he sees the second tibul. But what are we responding to his first question about why are we doing a tibul before the Suda? And we don't find any sort of like response to that question mentioned here in the Mishnah. So if what we're seeing here is metabel, in order to arouse the curiosity of the children with a heker of a shinui, then we should have anticipated, like, some response, oh, our forefathers were slaves or something along that line. But we don't find anything of this sort. And that's why other Rishonim say that this first Tibul Rishon is not a heker l'tinokos, but rather when they bring a second Tibul, and we'll see that the second Tibul is again charoses for the chazeres, then that's going to really be when the children will be curious about it. Now, in the footnote here at the end of number Lamed Gimel, if you have the footnotes, again, I'm not sure what footnotes you have and what you don't, but he writes at the very end of this long presentation that the Maharal Prague says that the children's curiosity are only going to be aroused when we get to the Morah. At the time that we get to the Morah, they're going to ask, why was it that the Tibul of the Morah is going to happen twice? Now, we said that the first Tibul, which we're learning about now, is a Yerek. We didn't say that it was necessarily Morah. Morah is let's say romaine lettuce or whatever it might be, but here he's talking about a yerek. It doesn't say that it's got to be romaine lettuce. So the Maharal basically washes his hands of heker tinokos until we get to the second part of Tibul, which is going to happen, right before we eat the Morah. But again, we have to always emphasize that the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is very unique. It requires, number one, as we said, Shelo Tshuva, and number two, it requires that we act out the Sipur. The story is not just a verbal communication, but it requires acting it out. And we're going to emphasize that we were freed from slavery, and therefore we were able to do 2 tibulim. Tibul is a big deal, to be able to get a yerek and be able to dip the yerek and dippings, and now he's doing 2 of them. That means he's a ben chorin. He's a real free man. Now the Rosh says that even if he doesn't have a son at his Seder table to ask the questions, which is something that we can all relate to because of COVID, if you remember, the Seder was just husband and wife. So he should ask himself the question. And the Rosh calls this chibuv mitzvah, which you'll see here quoted in Lamed Beis. Chibuv mitzvah. Now, we're not sure if this is a doraisa halacha that the Torah requires that you ask yourself a question. I mean, it seems a little bit odd, that you're sitting there asking yourself a question and then giving yourself an answer to the question. But at the very least, according to the Rosh, it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, not necessarily a d'oraisa. I can't prove it to you from the Torah itself, but there is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan that the answers should follow questions. Now, it could be that even when you're asking yourself a question, it's an important pedagogical tool. You focus on the question and you're curious about the question. If you go straight to the answer, well, you're reading it from a Haggadah, Avodim Hayinu L'Farav Mitzrayim, that's more mechanical. But to make it more of a powerful impact, you'll ask the question even if you're asking it to yourself. And that's what the Rosh calls chibuv mitzvah, meaning to beautify the mitzvah. When the son is asking a question, that's already a doraisa. V'gadatul bincha, and ki yishalcha bincha lemon. But if you have no son at the table, then clearly the question is going to come from yourself, and that's only d'Rabbanan. So basically, we could summarize this by saying that there are two chiyuvim in question and answer. There's one doraisa and one d'Rabbanan. The doraisa is when you have a son and he will ask the question. And those questions are codified or canonized in the Seder Haggadah, meaning the Daled Banim, and each one asks a different question. That's all doraisa. On a d'Rabbanan level, they instituted a requirement of she'ela u'tshuva, question and answer, even if there are no children at the table. You're just there yourself. Me, myself, and I, as we used to say. Now, the Rav of Brisk, Reb Chaim of Brisk, would apparently introduce every year the Seder with the following question, to which he gave three different answers. And the question was, we have a mitzvah the whole year round. L'man tizkar yom tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim. You should remember the day of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So what's unique about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim on the night of the 15th of Nisan? After all, the whole year round, we're obligated in the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. We fulfill that mitzvah in the third paragraph of Kriyat Shema. Ani Hashem Elokecha asher hotziisecha me'eretz Mitzrayim. So if the whole year round I have to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, what's unique about the Leil HaPesach? That's the question of Reb Chaim. And he would, try to evoke responses from the people. So if anyone could possibly offer their intuitive answers, what's the meaning of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim as a separate mitzvah on this night when the whole year round we're obligated in the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim?
Well, there's a difference between remembering the event and talking about it.
Excellent. So Jeff says the following, that Zechira does not require Sipur. Sipur is bepeh, it's a verbal recitation, and Zechira is in the head. What else? Any other distinctions? Like, let's say the whole year round, I would just remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. Maybe I would even say it out loud. Ani Hashem Elokecha asher hotziisecha me'eretz Mitzrayim, as we say in the third paragraph of Kriyat Shema. He says it once at night and once in the day. Why would that not be enough, even if he verbalizes it, to fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur?
But it's not personal.
What do you mean by personal? You mean you're just talking about the Almighty. You're not talking about the fact that you yourself went out of Mitzrayim.
That's right.
Excellent. Oh, okay. So now we invoke the Rambam, the famous Rambam that we've been quoting over and over again, Chayav Adam Liros es Atzmo Kilu Hu Yotza B'Mitzrayim. That's a unique obligation on the night of Pesach. You remember Yetzias Mitzrayim the whole year round, but to experience it as if personally you left Mitzrayim, that's your obligation on this night. And there are many, many different ways in which a person has to work himself up to this, I call it a frenzy, that he went out of Mitzrayim. It's not easy. What do you mean I went out of Mitzrayim? Baruch Hashem, I was brought up in New York City, and okay, there were couple of events I don't want to tell you about, but still, those were on, when we played stickball with the kids down the block, but we were okay. How do I feel as if I was a slave in Egypt? And that's where Reb Chaim used to emphasize the following, that in Zechiras Mitzias Mitzrayim the whole year round, all we need is a kolduhu. Kolduhu means just to mention that we left Mitzrayim. But on this night, we need an arichas dvarim. He says, "Kol hamesaper umarich b'yetzias Mitzrayim areza meshubach." You should be marich. Marich means to go into detail, ask the questions why and what caused the shibud and how they slowly but surely brought it upon us, and what were the suffering, sivlosam, how did they suffer, and then lead up slowly to Moshe Rabbeinu the Makis, and finally, Kriyas Yamsuf after Yetzias Mitzrayim. So that's Harichas Dvarim. I just want to mention in the name of my father, Zechron Levrach, my father was surprised, I guess you could call it, that he found that in the Rambam, in two different places, the Rambam uses almost the exact same language, word for word. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, when he talks about vidui, he writes, Kol hamarich b'dvarim elu misvadeh hareza meshubach. That even though there's a standard text of vidui, but nevertheless, he should be marich b'vidui. And those same words appear in the Rambam at the end of Hilchos Chometz Umatzah, when he talks about the night of the Seder, Kol hamarich u'mesaper hareza meshubach. My father used to point out that he believes it's not a coincidence, there's an underlying analogy between the two. When a person wants to reach a state of tshuva, especially on Yom Kippur, he's got to talk about his failures. That's what Vivi is about, whether we like it or not. And he has to feel a sense of almost humiliation that he didn't live up to his potential. And therefore he should be marich, because when you want to get to that emotional feeling, what we call a kiyum shebalev, a pnimius halev, then you have to be marich. You have to speak for a long time, go into details, what caused the sin, where I shouldn't have gone, and whom I shouldn't have hung out, and I shouldn't have been alone, I shouldn't have been here and there, and just go into detail and pour your heart out. Here too, in Yetzias Mitzrayim, since the goal is to reach that level, that experience, Ke'ilu Hu Atzmo Yotze Mitzrayim, he himself went out of Mitzrayim, then you have to be marich. It's not just enough to recite one pasuk and end it. You finished and you were Yotze Zayin. No. That's good the whole year round, but it's not going to be good enough on the night of the Seder. So we have so far two distinctions. Or maybe we could say three distinctions. First of all, that Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim is a mitzvah the whole year round, whereas Sipur is a mitzvah on the night of Pesach. Second difference is where Zechira requires just remembering, and here we require Sipur B'Peh V'Gadata. And thirdly, there's halach of Arichas Dvarim, that you should be marich, you should go into detail, long-winded presentations, which doesn't apply the whole year round. It only applies on the night of the Seder. But perhaps we can add a fourth difference based on what we discussed earlier about why we're doing Tibul before the Suda, something that's unusual. And the answer is because V'Gadata L'Bincha should be Derech She'elo Tshuva. We want to arouse the children to ask the question. And perhaps even in the absence of children, we still are going to ask ourselves the question. And that would only apply on the night of Pesach. The whole year round, we don't ask any questions. We just thank Hashem and acknowledge that He took us out of Mitzrayim. But tonight, on the night of the Seder, we're going to ask for questions. We're going to hope for questions. We're going to structure our entire Seder around questions and answers, and that's called Derech Shelo Tshuva. Now, that's what Reb Chaim used to teach his household on the night of Pesach before he started the actual Seder. But then Reb Chaim would say the following, that in the context of Arichas Dvarim, that we're marich and we expand and we have a long-winded sipur, we have to fulfill on this particular night two obligations. One is we need to explain what's called the Tamei HaMitzvos. We have to point to the matzah. Well, let's go back to the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Point to the Korban Pesach, that roasted lamb meat that's on the table, and ask ourselves why. Why are we eating this? Why are we eating matzah? Why are we eating maror? And we have a principle that's going to appear later on in the Mishnah Kuf Yud Zayin, Rabbi Yishmael, Kol Shalom, Shlosh Dvarim Halalu, Lo Yatzi Yidei Chovas. He's got to explain the mitzvahs. Shlo Hispik B'Tzeisa, B'Tzeikom, Lahachmitz. Or the maror that we experienced in Mitzrayim. But then Reb Chaim adds another point. Within the context of Arichas Dvarim, there's halacha, a requirement of lidrosh es a parsha kulu. Which parsha do we have to darshan on this night? A parsha in the Torah. You would have expected Shmos, right? There's somewhere, Shmos is at least half of the Sefer is about Yetzias Mitzrayim. No. We're going to have to darshan a different parsha. Which one?
Bikurim.
What's it called?
Is it Bikurim?
Excellent. Arami Oved Ov, which is Mikra Bikurim. When a person brought his first fruits, he would recite an entire parsha in Sefer Dvarim, and it's called Mikra Bikurim. And on this night, we're going to have to read that parsha and darshan it. Darshan meaning interpret it based on the oral tradition, Torah Sheba'al Peh. So these are two additional aspects of Arichas Dvarim that only apply this night and will not apply the whole year round. We don't have Tamei HaMitzvos the whole year round. And we don't darshan a parsha in the Torah the whole year round. So the mitzvah of Sipur Yisrael is we have to admit, it's a complex mitzvah. It has many different dimensions to it. In fact, the Haggadah itself says, the Sipur is going to revolve around the objects that we're going to have to eat tonight, the matzah and the maror, at the time of Pesach, the Korban Pesach. And we're going to ask for Tamei HaMitzvos, and we're going to explain each one of the mitzvah, the concept of chipazon. All this is included in Rabbi Gamliel's famous dictum of Kol Shelo Amar Shlosha Dvarim Halolu Lo Yatzi Yidei Chovaso, and we have to darshan the parsha of Arami Ovidov. So I heard from my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik, he was always wondering, he was amazed at the fact that we're reading a parsha Bikurim. Why are we borrowing from one mitzvah to the other? I mean, we're not bringing Bikurim on the night of Pesach. And furthermore, why don't we read from Sefer Shmos? If you're already reading from the biblical exegesis, you might as well interpret Psukim in Shmos. I mean, they're full. Again, you'd be there for the whole night, but the question is still a question. So Rav Soloveitchik used to say that in addition to what his grandfather, Rav Chaim, used to say about the unique dimensions of this mitzvah, he would add another unique dimension, and that's called Hallel v'Hodoya. A whole year round, we acknowledge and we testify to the fact, that God took us out of Mitzrayim, the Beis Avodah. But we don't have Hallel the whole year round. In fact, the Hallel of Leila Pesach might be the Hallel that we recite in the Beis HaKnesses. But be that as it may, at the Seder, incorporated into the very Seder, we are going to recite Hallel. Where else do we find in the Torah a mitzvah of Hallel? To the best of my knowledge, if I remember that I heard this from Rav Soloveitchik, we only find it once, other than the Hallel of Leila Pesach. And that is the mitzvah of Bikurim. When a person brings his Bikurim, first fruits to the Beis HaMikdash after an entire, season of planting and harvesting, etc., he brings his first fruits and he expresses thanksgiving. He expresses his hakaras hatov for the fact that Hashem gave him the land, gave him the ability to produce, and the ultimate product. How do you fulfill the mitzvah of Hallel in Bikurim? By reciting Mikra Bikurim. That's the recitation. To Parshas Kisov. But what about the night of the Seder? Unkelissa, if I'm not mistaken, translates the word Vigadita as Shevach Vodoya. Well, where, what? How do I fulfill the mitzvah Shevach Vodoya? And the answer is, we're going to derive it from Bikurim. And we're going to read that parsha Bikurim, minus the last pasuk, which you've brought me to the land, because on this night of Pesach, we're still in Golus, we're still in Chutz La'aretz. But the rest of Aram Yovid Avi, which traces the entire history from Yaakov Avinu and through the Shibud, and all the Inui and whatever else is written there in that parsha, that we will read as Hodoya on the night of Pesach. We are basically cloning or grafting the mitzvah of Mikra Bikurim onto Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, because the common denominator that links them together is Shevach Vodoya. And that's not something that applies the whole year round under the rubric of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yeah, you remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, but you don't have to get up and thanks and recite Hallel the whole year round. In fact, you're not even allowed to do so. Only on this night is there a mitzvah of Hallel. And that mitzvah of Hallel will mirror image the mitzvah of Hallel in Mikra Bikurim when you bring your first fruits to the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, we're going to use that parsha. And then the Rav went a step further. He said it's not enough to read the psukim in the parsha. That might be enough for Bikurim. But on Leila Pesach, where there's a mitzvah Vigada to Lebincha, you have to darshan the psukim. It's an integration of Torah Shebechsav together with Torah Shebal Peh. And every one of the drashos that we will, the exegesis of those, I don't know how many psukim, I think it's 5 or 6 psukim from Parshas Kisavo, from Mikra Bikurim, every one of those is Torah Shebal Peh. And we're going to integrate Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. And I once saw, I'm not sure if the Rav quoted this is many years ago, that I believe it was one of the Gaonim, that's before the Rishonim. Maybe it was Rav Hai Gaon. I'm not sure. I have to. He was asked, can I just read the psukim without interpreting them? Would I fulfill my mitzvah of Sipi Yitzis Mitzrayim? And the Gaon, going back to like 11 centuries here, responded that not only have you messed up, dropped the ball, as we say proverbially, on the mitzvah of Sipi Yitzis Mitzrayim, but moreover, you're chashud lios echad meoso kat hakofrim v'torah shebal peh. You know who he's referring to? The Karoim. The original Tzdukim, who later on became Karoim, and they denied Torah shebal peh. Our mitzvah tonight is a mitzvah to integrate both Torah shebachsav and Torah shebal peh. And the Torah really condensed into 5 psukim the entire Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, but only if we interpret those psukim based on Torah shebal peh with all the drashos. And if you refuse to recite those drashos, your seder will last about 15 minutes. That's fine. You want an abridged seder, but you're chashed to be a karoi who denies Torah shebal peh. And Rabosa, I think I mentioned this to you in the past, that karoim still exist today. My father told me that in his shtetl, where he was brought up, the first 12 years of his life, a little teeny shtetl called Plisa, my sister who works in the National Library, after 20 years, she found a map that had Plisa on it. It was a very small village, a shtetl. And my father told me that in his shtetl, there was a shul for the karoim. They had a name for it in Yiddish. They called the Karim shul. Could you imagine? My father saw a karoim. Today you have to, you go out to, where's it, Shomron, to see a couple of those deaf mutes there that are still bringing the Korban Pesach. I don't know, whatever it is. Okay, be that as it may, that's what we have. So I think we've successfully put Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim into a framework to understand the difference, the contrast between Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim and Zechiras Yitzis Mitzrayim. And the element of She'elo Tshuva, to get the children, their curiosity is aroused and they will ask questions. That's what we're learning about now in our Mishnah here on Kuf Yud Dalet, Tibul Rishon, which many Rishonim say is so unusual that they would bring out Yerokos before the meal. We don't eat vegetables before the meal. And dip them. And hopefully the children are astute and observant. It depends how mature the child is. Many children are busy with whatever they're busy. They're not even paying attention. They're too young. They're too immature. And people, you should know, have become very creative in terms of how to get the children awake and involved in the Seder. My son Menachem, I don't know if you met him, he does a whole play for the children on the night of the Seder. He wears an outfit like Paro, and he tells the Egyptians this and that, and then they buy have you seen this? The Eser Makas, they have these little frogs and all this stuff, they throw it at each other. It's good. It's educational. The Iraqians, have a minhag that at the Seder, they put out a pail of water and the whole family lines up single file. Each one puts a matz on his shoulder and they jump over the pail of water. That's really, Chayav Adam Laharos Atzmo Kilu Yotzav Mitzrayim. Now, as we're going to learn, there are 5 different categories or subcategories of maror, what we call 5 different minim, just like we have 5 different minim of dagon, of wheat. We have 5 different minim. I shouldn't say wheat. Wheat is one of the 5. I should say grains, wheats, oats, barley, and so forth. And we also have 5 different subcategories of maror, 5 different minim. Now, we're going to sort of like insert a piece into the Mishnah that was omitted as an introduction to the next part. And that is that there are many, many vegetables besides the 5 meaning of maror, the 5 species of maror, carrots and potatoes and parsley and if all things are equal, the first tibul that we're doing now, right after Kiddush, is going to be with a yerek that's not one of the 5 minim of maror. We're going to leave maror for later on. And I think I may have told you more than once that the Mar D'Asra of Elizabeth, New Jersey, he was a very, very special and great Talmid Chacham. His name was Rav Pinchas Teitz. Have you ever heard of him? No? He came from the old country, from Lita, established a beautiful kehillah in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And he used to take, for this yerek that we're learning, a banana. And dip a banana into salt water for the first tibul. Now, I tried it. It didn't taste very good, but I know salt water and banana, it just didn't go. But there are 2 reasons why he preferred a banana. One is he wanted to teach the people that you make a bori pri adama on a banana. People at that time mistakenly made a bori pri eitz on a banana. And secondly, if the purpose of the tibul of this first yerek is to arouse the curiosity of the children, any child would wonder, why is Abba taking a banana and dipping it into salt water at the beginning of the Seder? So if you want to accomplish your goal, if you use, parsley or potato, maybe they will catch it, they won't catch it, but banana they'll catch. Okay, now having added that piece to the Mishnah, we're going to go on to what the Mishnah does say. What if he has no other yerakos other than one of the 5 species of maror? And that's called chazeres. So it says in the Mishnah, metabel b'chazeres. He can use the maror, which he's going to later eat for the sake of the mitzvah maror with a bracha, and he could use it now before he starts the meal as tibul rishon. Why? Because he has no other vegetables. Very strange, how you imagine, because we were brought up in a very affluent society and so forth. So who would imagine that the only vegetables you have are maror, like endives or I don't know what. Lettuce, horseradish, whatever. That's all you have. So if that's all you have, you're going to use that for tibul rishon. Because the yerek. Now, the language of the Mishnah is a little bit odd. It says metabel bichazeres. The word bichazeres, the bays, which usually means in chazeres, but now we're talking about, we're talking about taking the chazeres and being tovel. And the tibul should be in charoses. That's what it says over here in Rabbeinu Hananel and in Rashi. The Rashbam disagrees. This tibul rishon is not in charoses. In fact, according to the Rashbam, they have not yet brought charoses to the table. Charoses will come later on. Where is it? Is it in this Mishnah? One second. No, I think it's in a later Mishnah. One second, give me a second here. Can anybody find charoses here? Oh, there it is. See, let's just skip for a split second. Let's just skip the words Ad shemagil leparperes hapas. Just jump over those words for a minute. And then the Mishnah says, hey, viu lefun of matzah, v'chazeres, v'charoses, v'shnei tavshilim. So it seems like the Mishnah is telling you that for chazeres, which is the maror, we need charoses. But that's in the second part of the Mishnah. What is the Mishnah telling here? In the first part of the Mishnah, it says, mitabel b'chazeres. You take the chazeres and you dip it. You can't tell me you dip it in charoses because they haven't yet brought charoses out to the table. Again, we're going to have to ask another question, but they haven't yet brought chazeres out to the table. Because here it says metabel b'chazeres, so we must have chazeres. So what does it mean? Heviu lefun of chazeres. Apparently, in Brisk we would say tzvei dinim. There are two dinim of chazeres. There's one chazeres which by chance, by accident, happens to be chazeres. It's one of the 5 species of maror. And then there's the real McCoy chazeres, meaning the chazeres that's brought out for the mitzvah of alachilus maror, which gets a bracha. So Tosas rejects this. He says it's going to say Aviu lefun of chazeres, even though he already ate chazeres and tibul rishon. So it's very possible that the tibul rishon was in chazeres. Again, I don't know why the Mishnah has to repeat it so. Then Tosas says, the Gemara later on says that eating chazeres is very tricky. It's a little bit of a health hazard. It has a very, very sharp taste. And therefore, it could have negative repercussions unless you put it into chazeres. Into charoses. Now, charoses, we usually assume charoses is sweet. Maybe it does have certain, like dates or whatever that's sweet. But really, charoses is supposed to have something that's called keha, kuf hey hey. A certain acidy, vinegary element to it. And that element is going to counter I hate to say this word, but worms. I don't know, maybe there's a nicer word for it. But it does seem like all vegetables, but especially chazeres, which is maror, are bug infested. Now, again, I don't know if that's true today, because when we buy the long horseradish and then we peel it and it becomes white, and you see the white color. I don't know that we see so many worms there, but there could be worms. Worms crawl in the ground, and the vegetables are growing in the ground. And just in case there might be, and apparently at the time of Chazal, this was a real problem, there might be bug-infested chazeres, they would dip it into charosas, which had that acidy taste, that vinegary taste, and that would destroy the worms or make them fly away, whatever it is. So therefore, Tosas comes to the following conclusion, that if this first tibul is chazeres, it's got to be in charoses. Otherwise, you're in a sakana, because the Gemara says that those worms could really mess up your whole system. You got to get them, zap them dead with charoses. So honestly, I don't know what the Rashbam's response would be to these arguments of Tosfos. Number one, you see that here they're going to bring out Chazeres, so how could there be Chazeres here? And number two, the only tibul we know about is in Charoses, and the Charoses, number three, is meant to detonate any possible bugs and so forth. So in footnote number 36, Lamed Vav, you have this or not? Yeah. Anyway, it's hard to hear you on Zoom, but he says that in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah, the whole year round, people eat chazeres without tibul. And they're not worried about any danger from the worms. But nevertheless, the Rabbanan made a takana that when we get to the maror itself, to be absolutely certain that there are no bugs, no worms, we dip the maror into charoses. But in Tivul Rishon, we'll do what we do the whole year round with chazeres, and we don't require Tivul b'charoses. Because Rabbeinu Yonah claims we're not afraid the whole year round of this health hazard that requires us to take the maror and dip it into charoses. The whole year round we eat chazeres straight. So he says the following, that the whole year round, we don't do tibul of chazeres in charos. And therefore the first tibul, which is only l'shem heker, the fact that the children should be wondering why we're doing a tibul b'yerek at the beginning of the Seder before the meal, there was no takana that required tibul b'charosas. And they'll do the tibul that they would do the whole year round. He has another pshat here that later on, when he does the tibul of the chazeres in charoses, and the charoses goes down his belly, the charoses would kill any bug that he might have eaten in the first tibul of chazeres. Again, we're talking about a case where he only has chazeres. So the final conclusion at Tosfos is that with regard to any yerek other than the 5 species of chazeres, which was the missing part of the Mishnah, then he doesn't need tibul b'charoses. Yeah, he does tibul in mei melach, in zaltzvas. But if he only has chazeres, then he needs charoses for tibul rishon. So let's just make a note of where we got up to. And Steve is going to help us out with the footnotes, send them around. I also, Steve, would like to ask you if you can add Amudei Hod Simon Chaf Vav. Because we're going to talk about the kara and what's on the Seder plate. And we'll talk, B'li Neder, about the Akiras HaShulchan. They used to have a minhag in the old days that they pulled away the table again to arouse the curiosity of the children because they haven't even eaten the meal yet and they're already pulling away the table. So that's Simon Chav Zayin, number 27. And that begins on page 176. Now, I don't know how much of Simon Chav Zayin we're going to cover. It's very extensive, but it does touch on many, many different issues about the Seder, like the Shnei Tavshilin and the Zeichel Chagiga, Zeichel Pesach. Now, in Simon Chav Ches, he dedicates himself exclusively to Karpas. And Karpas means that it's not one of the 5 minim. And the question of, where we dip it. And then he has an interesting issue. What happens if all he has in his possession is one kizayis of Mora? That's all he was able to get. Should he use it for Tibul Rishon? But then he's going to have to make a bracha on it, I think. Al Achilus Mora. Or should he wait till after he eats the matzah? Because the pasuk says, "Al matzos umrorim yochlu." Okay, then. So this is where we'll stop for today. And if you want to join me for Masechet Sanhedrin, then we'll be hopefully getting to that in about 15 minutes. Okay, then. Shavua Tov, Chodesh Tov, and thank you.